Thank you so much, Richard. Great to have you, and welcome back to the surface.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no, yeah, exactly. To the surface of the Earth, where I've been spending a little bit of time off of late. So, but no, great to be with you.
Yeah, great. So tell us what is actually happening right now. You've been aboard of International Space Station, and recently you've been deep in the ocean with the Explorers Club. So if you can just explain how things are moving in your world, would be great.
Yes, exactly. Well, just a few weeks ago, I guess almost 2 months ago now, I became the first explorer who has explored the Earth from pole to pole. I actually went from South Pole first to North Pole later, but also have orbited above it. I spent 2 weeks living in the International Space Station, and then most recently made a dive to the deepest point in Earth's oceans, down to the Challenger Deep. And so I've had these last few years, especially, have been I've been doing a lot of exploring, and kind of cursorily related to that is that about that same time I became the president of the Explorers Club, which is based here in New York but has 33 chapters around the world. So I'm helping to run that exploration nonprofit that has been around for 120 years almost.
That's great. So tell us why you decided to actually go through that journey and exploration, and also what is the mission of the Explorers Club?
Well, for me, I I enjoy exploring in extreme environments, and I really mean extreme by things that are just hard to get into, hard to survive in, potentially things that kind of test your willingness to face discomfort. Hopefully not too much danger, but at least go through significant training and work hard to reach these areas. And so that's why I like the poles and space and deep. But on that same list, for example, is the interior of active volcanoes. About a year and a half ago, took a trip down to the interior, into the caldera, the active caldera of the Masaya volcano down in Nicaragua. And so and then another thing I enjoy about these extreme environments, other than I find these otherworldly experiences very inspirational, but I've also found that you can do some really great science that happens to be a similar science in all of those extreme places, which is to look for extremophile life forms, kind of life that lives despite the extreme temperatures, either high or low, extreme chemical environments, places that are either acidic or poisonous in some other sense, sulfuric in the case of the volcanic vents, or even something called piezoophiles, which are extremophiles that live at high pressure that you can find down at the Mariana Trench. And there's even been people now doing sampling on the outside of our spacecraft because they've been contaminated by years of people climbing in and out of the space station, leaving their fingerprints and some bacteria on the outside, which have actually survived and thrived even in the harsh radiation and vacuum of space. So extremophile research is something I really enjoy, and it kind of ties together all these extreme environments I go to. But the other half of your question was the Explorers Club. The Explorers Club was founded, as I mentioned, about 120 years ago. 1904 was when it was founded, and it was founded by some of the early great explorers in what some people think was the golden age of exploration. Where people made the first journeys to the poles. A few decades later, the first journeys to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. In fact, was visited a couple years before I was born originally, with the first dive that went down there, and the first climbing of Mount Everest. Those people were some of our early members, but in modern days, the scientific aspects of exploration have become more of kind of upfront in what the explorers of the Explorers Club do. But we still are going into a lot of these really extreme environments. We just use a lot more high-tech gear than just brute force to explore some of these places. Like, for example, if you're going to go to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, you really need a submersible that is capable of surviving, 1,000 times this pressure at the surface, and operate down there safely and repeatedly if you want to do science. And that technology has only come into existence, these last couple of years. So it's there are still parts of even the physical surface of the Earth or under the oceans of our Earth that are just opening up to exploration because of the difficulty of reaching it.
So tell us about your journey down to the bottom of the ocean. How many trainings and how much of training did you go through? And also during the like your journey, tell us like how was it?
Well, from a training standpoint, traveling to space required like 2 years of training to come up to speed on the operation of all the equipment required to reach space. The submersible operations are much easier. In fact, we could really just become trained while on board the support ship that we were aboard for a couple of weeks surrounding the dives we went on. Much easier to operate, but also a lot more hands-on in the sense of a lot of the experiments and equipment that we were using were equipment that universities or companies had built to operate at full ocean depth pressures, but rarely, if ever, had any of this equipment been tested for use down at these pressures. And so one of the things we were constantly doing was evaluating equipment even as we would receive it. And especially after you kind of get used to the submarine operations and you understand, you have a sense of what will work and what won't. A lot of the equipment we redesigned on the fly. It arrives, we end up tearing some things apart. We have a little machine shop on board the ship. We sometimes manufacture new little parts and strap it onto either the submersible or these landers that go down at the same time, and then try to bring back up samples and store them or process them in preparation for sending off to research groups to study. And so we sort of got involved almost on a daily basis. Even when we weren't diving, we were working with these experiments to get them prepared for and operate as best as possible in the deep. So
what kind of samples did you bring up?
Well, there were really three main areas, if I'm counting correctly. One was water sampling. In particular, we were looking for microplastics. It turns out this is something we've done on a lot of our other trips as well. And whether you're at the poles or at the deepest points in the ocean, sadly, we have, the amount of plastic trash that we dump into our oceans, and then it gets, ground up by wave action, has created microplastic filaments, often, filaments from your clothing, that now are pervading all of the water systems on Earth, including all the way down at the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench. And so when we take water samples or mud samples, or frankly, even samples of the flesh of the small animals that are eating, whatever they can find that rains down from 7 miles of ocean above them, they ingest and then include in their bodies this microplastic. And so looking for those microplastics is one big piece of it. A second one I sort of mentioned with the other work that I do, which is looking for extremophiles. So we're actually bringing back, again, water and mud. We were looking for bacterial mats down there on my dives. We didn't find any of those. Those would have been a particular treasure if we could find some. We send those to a different laboratory to look for extremophiles. And then the third is looking for new, larger species of life. And so what's interesting about that depth is that if you look even on Wikipedia, it describes the deepest points in the ocean as pretty much barren, lifeless wastelands. And in fact, it's very much not true. It's just that if you come down there with a giant, noisy, bright, submersible, you scare off anything that's been down, that's down there pretty quickly. And so that's one of the things the landers do well for you. So we have 3 landers that go down and advance the submersible that sort of help you make sort of a underwater GPS with acoustic pingers that are on them. But they also have cameras and sample trays, and you can put bait on them, and there's lights on them. And so these landers go down first, and then just sit quietly in the dark, often with bait out or traps, and then it also has a light that you can leave on. And it turns out if they sit still down there for a few hours, life actually comes to them. And so then life goes back to normal, you might say, despite their disturbance upon arrival. And you see that actually the bottom of the sea is actually full of life. And with the submersible, when you come down later, you can actually go over and visit those and see the bait, see all the life that is gathered around it. In the area that we were at the Challenger Deep, there's a lot of things called amphipods, look to me like little headless shrimp that are actually quite common, very small up to quite large, small lobster size amphipods. But lots of other things, little transparent creatures that are relatives of the sea cucumber that look like little squids that are kind of drifting along the bottom as well, and even some kind of tube worm type of animals that cling to the underhangs of rock ledges that we see periodically as well.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the physical environment down there, like the pressure, like all the kind of like that is obviously. I think, is it every 10 kilometers you go down, the pressure gets like really, really harsh? Is that the correct?
Yes. So every 33 feet, so every 10 meters or so,
10 meters. Okay.
Every 10 meters, you get another atmosphere of pressure. So if you go under 10 meters of water, then you're at 2 atmospheres, the true atmosphere that's above you and the water equivalent of 1 more atmosphere. And we're going down to 10,925 meters. So that's over 1,000 atmospheres. That's like, 100 elephants sitting on top of your head with a post that's only 1 square inch, on top of your head. So if you imagine 100 elephants pushing down on a high heel on the top of your head, that would obviously hurt at the very least. And so the submersible has to hold out that kind of pressure. And so what's interesting about the submersible versus a spacecraft is a spacecraft and a submersible on the interior are very similar. You have to add oxygen, you have to scrub CO2, you have to manage the partial pressures of gases. But what you'll find is that the equipment on the interior feels very similar, very familiar. But the hull is very different. In space, you're only holding in 1 atmosphere. At the deep, you're holding out 1,000 atmospheres. And so the hull of a spacecraft is, not much thicker than a Coke can. The hull of the submersible is 9 centimeters of titanium. And the pressure is still so great that the entire hull is crushed by about 0.5 centimeter. So it's still, that pressure is so immense that the vehicle actually gets smaller around you due to that pressure.
Wow. So you've been in the space and you've been in the ocean. Tell us about the different experiences and different view. Like in the space, you have the exposure overview of the Earth. And then in the bottom of the ocean, you see a different world, And there's also a lot of criticism right now that why we are spending so much money going to kind of like, into space commercialization or even like space exploration, whereas haven't been so many research done in the bottom of the oceans and the marine life. So tell us about your view. Yes.
Well, first of all, let's talk about the overview versus the seafloor, and then we'll get on to the importance of these various kinds of exploration. So what's interesting is, first of all, the view from space, the personal impact of having trampled in space will be very hard to beat. When you are floating in space above the Earth, not only is it serene and beautiful and you feel a sense of isolation, and but you're looking down at really a profound view of the Earth that is orbiting, that is rotating below you as you orbit, and it feels like a fire hose of information about everything from weather to tectonic plate movement to pollution and the impact of humanity, all just pouring into your mind just by looking out the window. So you are left at the end of a few dozen orbits with feeling this deep connection to the Earth that you never had. Even I would have always described myself as an environmentalist even before I flew, but it really creates a fundamental shift in your perspective about how small the Earth is and how really important it is that we all do whatever we can to try to protect it. Because it would be very difficult to go live somewhere else, despite the fact that I'm also in favor of humans immigrating off of Earth. I think it does not change the profound importance of all of this exploration is to help us back here on Earth. So let me actually jump to your the last part of your question, which was, why are we going into space versus oceans versus, feeding or supporting the poor in a million ways other ways we could do it. And so I think people often, have a misunderstanding about what is happening with this exploration and what the real cost benefit is. I think no one would argue that the cell phone in your pocket, or now everyone's pocket, is not a major aid to life. And when I mean aid, I mean it makes people happier, it makes them more productive. It brings it brings everything from information through education and even economic opportunity to people in a way that has profoundly changed life on Earth. But a lot of that is only possible with the amount of infrastructure we have now finally put up into space. Things like the GPS network and also satellite communications and all the communications work that's going on by private companies like Starlink that's going to put internet. It is putting internet in space, and we'll do it in a way that can really reach anybody on the surface of the Earth, not just the wealthy countries, but every country. And so these things are profoundly important. And when you think about even private citizens paying for their own way into space, most all of these people, like myself, are entrepreneurs. And we're not just going because we want to, although we do want to. We're also going to see what businesses can we start up here. And so, for example, it is profoundly important that we explore space from a resource standpoint. To help people on Earth now, if you think of the complex stack of problems we have, I think climate change is the quintessential problem of this generation. It actually will affect all of humanity, and it's guaranteed to be deeply affecting already, but it's profoundly important we try to tackle it. And one of the important things we have to do to tackle that is energy. Another thing we have to tackle is fresh water. We could always desalinate, but by the way, that takes a whole bunch of energy, and that puts it back into climate change. And then you talk about the pollution that we're doing, which also is a function of population and these other problems. And then that makes you go back to, well, should we limit the population of people on the Earth? Which, so we have all this whole stack of problems that either means we are soon going to have to, while we should all be as efficient as possible, we should recycle, we should use less energy, et cetera. But that is not going to cut it. That is not going to solve this problem unless we literally start rationing energy and even the birth rate. And if we are not willing to ration all those things, which, by the way, I don't think we could, and I don't think we should, instead, we need to look into space for the bounty of resources that we need right now on Earth. And whether that's energy from space, whether that's resources from mining asteroids in space, whether that is moving our growth rate of humanity off of the planet into either orbital space stations or onto the surface of the moon or onto Mars, all the abundance of space is what will help us on Earth now and prevent the severe rationing that would otherwise be required.
Thanks for explaining. That was really amazing. So you went to space as an entrepreneur, right? And then when you came back, what was your perspective? What did you gain in terms of like motivation and ambition that actually helped you to explore more?
What's interesting about this feeling you get that often is referred to as the overview effect, where the Earth feels small and precious, and you feel deeply connected to it. I always, like I had said, I always would have described myself as an environmentalist, but my actions in life didn't align with it that well. I drove sports cars that were gas guzzlers. I had a big house. I generated lots of trash. I pumped and used lots of water. And I did give a lot of charitable money to, I think, great organizations like Nature Conservancy, which I think is a great apolitical way to preserve property. But my actual lifestyle, wasn't fantastic. And by the way, I would still say it's far, far, far from perfect. But here's what the trip in space did. It made me come back and go, okay, I can afford to understand how I can be part of the solution versus being, an abuser and really a poster child for the problem. So let me explore the boundaries of that. And so I began to do things like, did some of the easy things like switched all the lighting in our house from incandescent to LED. And interestingly, I only did that. I did that first, and then I actually put probes on all the circuits in my house to find that your lighting is actually almost irrelevant. An irrelevant amount of usage of power in your house is your lighting. In fact, this is the house I had back in Austin, Texas. In fact, all of the electrical use in my house combined was only about a third of my air conditioning use. And so the air conditioning was so much bigger than anything else that changing the lights out was the wrong end of the dog, the tail of the dog. And so figuring out how to insulate the house better or better manage air conditioning or get more efficient units would actually save way more energy than the effort that I had put into changing out all the light bulbs and the expense of buying early.
Using nuclear energy for the AC.
But whatever it would be. But then I actually had something that was even worse than that. I had something in my house in Austin that was actually 3 times bigger than the utilization of everything in my house, including its air conditioning, which was the movement of water. And what I mean by that is I had a 700-foot down well that I was pumping water up from. I had a reverse osmosis machine to purify the water. I was watering St. Augustine grass of about 3 acres, and that's a big water hog. I had a pool and a pond, both of which circulated water, of many hours every day. And so those pumps, all the pumps running all that water, and you'll notice the theme here is the things that move physical objects. Water is the hardest to move. It was 3 times more expensive than everything else. And the next one down was air conditioning, moving of air and conditioning it by temperature. And that was 3 times bigger than everything else. And so when you get down to light bulbs are literally inconsequential. And so, it's still probably better to have LEDs because also LEDs are cooler than incandescent. So it also takes load off your air conditioning. So there's another benefit. But the point is I began to explore what are the right things to do? What are the meaningful ways to impact? Because it's not always what you hear about on television or people talk about. And there's even things that are popularly held positions that I don't happen to agree with. And people listening, please don't call me out or think too badly of me if you disagree with what I have to say. But for example, you think of paper, and a lot of people want to recycle paper, but paper is farmed, and if our real problem is sequestering carbon, trees and grass do a really good job of pulling carbon out of the air. So maybe instead of recycling it, we maybe ought to bury it, but we have to bury it in a way that doesn't create methane that then gets back into the atmosphere. And so these systems are very complicated, and we need to really think deeply about what are the behaviors we really want people to do to really solve the problem, not just feel like you're solving the problem.
Yeah, it's the education, I think, that lacks. Like certain countries do recycle, and certain countries don't even recycle. It's just like, and it's all about education, and I think, and also a sense of urgency. But then certain countries also tax you because of, all that pollution. Even, like we have a climate change tax, for example, in Canada, right? But that's also, I think, interesting. You hit the point.
But here's the trick about taxes. The governments around the world, I'm not accusing Canadian government of this particular ill, but this is something that I know is done in the United States. That we have part of the taxes you pay on gasoline go to pay for roads, for example. But in fact, they collect more money in gas taxes than the roads need. But what they then do is they leave that account in surplus because somewhere else they might want to spend money, like let's suppose it's on schools. If there's not enough money in for schools, they run that one into deficit. And that way the combined totals means the budget is balanced. And so what's important, if you're going to collect money from a tax for anti-pollution, well, increasing the cost might already dissuade people from being a polluter. But it's actually important that if the point of that money is to then go clean up polluted places, that the money gets spent on cleaning up polluted places. And in a lot of cases, the tax money is just kept in the general budget. And even though you can't spend it on anything other than cleaning up polluted places, they just leave it in surplus while something else goes in deficit, and ta-da, the budget is balanced. And so we have to even make sure that our laws around these taxation that are intended to affect behavior and actually clean up part of the problem and actually, help solve climate change, for example. We need to make sure that the full path of the money is managed properly.
Exactly. I think it's more of a political move than an environmental move,
Often.
In some extent. So we talked about space exploration and obviously the importance of that. And tell us about what do you think of now we're in a momentum that space commercialization is actually taking off, especially with Axiom right now, SpaceX, even Blue Origin is actually kind of like gearing up for the Shepherd. So tell us that what do you think and where are we?
Well, I like one of the things, Peter Diamandis was saying about the X Prize, which was after it was won, it was an amazing overnight success. 20 years later, it's an overnight success. And, we're coming from a time when, prior to the year 2000, all astronauts and cosmonauts were government supported. No one flew privately in space. Between 2000 and 2020, there were 7 of us who flew privately, all through Space Adventures, all on a Russian Soyuz, all under our own recognizance. As of this moment, as of this conversation, the most recent human launch was the Crew 2, a SpaceX flight of NASA and partners to the International Space Station. But the very next launch also happens to be on a Dragon capsule, SpaceX Dragon, is Inspiration 4. 4 people flying completely under their private recognizance. And from today forward, not only is the majority of flights which are manifested flying privately, but it appears that will forevermore be true. That we have really turned a corner from the majority of people being government astronauts to, from now on, the majority of people going into space will be private citizens. And to me, that is a profound change that is happening this moment. And so I couldn't be happier about it. I mean, it's now again one of these things where, after 20 years, it's an overnight success. That people look back at this and go like, well, of course, there's the private space flight travel is the way to go. And I think 20 years from now, we'll look at this and go, yes, it makes perfect sense that if we're going someplace first, or a place we haven't proven that we can get to repeatedly safely, then governments should help get involved in, like, in the original voyages, similar to Christopher Columbus or Magellan, to back these expeditions into the true unknown. However, once we know how to do it and we know if there is value and what the nature of that value is, then either it's not worth it for anybody to go back, or if it is, private industry should be stepping in to help show that and to take advantage of that and to bring back that value for humanity right here on Earth. And so we're just now entering that era. I know it appears to naysayers like it's a bunch of wealthy yahoos taking themselves into space, and to some degree that absolutely is a bunch of wealthy yahoos taking themselves into space. But that belies the fact that these are really important steps. Even little things like when NASA selects astronauts, they have so many applicants for so few positions that if you are not medically perfect, they don't need to consider you because there's 1,000 other applicants that are medically perfect that they could choose. And so why take the risk of putting somebody into space who might be challenged by the physiological challenges of being in weightlessness? And by flying private citizens who just want to go and are willing to take those risks and willing to do whatever medical work is required to prove they'll survive, we now are understanding those parameters and how to deal with them, how to help people, how to help them with bone loss, muscle loss, intraocular eye pressure, retinal damage, all these things that we didn't have enough body count, frankly, to measure, or the right kind of participants to measure. We now have the ability to study. And if we really want humanity to ultimately become a multi-planet species, which I think we need to do, these early adopters who are willing to pay their own money and take their own risks are a key part of opening up the frontier.
Would you go again?
Oh, I would go again in a heartbeat. And my wife Letitia knows that very well, and she knows I'd go any day of the week as often as I could. So she actually has asked me, please wait till the children are old enough to like remember their father reasonably well before you take too many of these, potentially deadly risks. But fortunately, my kids are already getting a little older now. And also, I think she's overestimating the risks. I think actually capsules are actually quite safe. The Soyuz capsule has a 40-year perfect safety track record. And even in the United States, the only capsule fatality we had was on a launch pad when we used to use full oxygen. They had a pad fire. And so capsules have been a very safe way to get back and forth to space. It appears that it will continue to be that way. And so I think we can all hope and plan to do this safely.
I think the only hurdle was the heavy astronaut suits now that I think SpaceX has redesigned them, and it's kind of like it's very easy to touch the screens for the astronauts inside the Dragon. So I think the technology is also taking us there, which is exciting.
Yeah, and in fact, that's actually what most people I don't think realize about technology is I think people know little bits like the space program is a lot of innovations like Velcro. It comes largely from the space industry, but they may not understand just how pervasive these trickle down technologies have been. Everything like night vision goggles and photomultipliers, or now even your cameras on your phone, their low light sensitivity comes from research that came out of the space program, and everyone's air conditioners. Now we have much more efficient air conditioning units than we used to have when I was a kid, and a big part of that is because for rockets needed to be able to have pumps and things that worked with liquid oxygen at extremely cold temperatures, and so new alloys of metals had to be invented to be able to handle these extreme pressures, these extreme temperatures. And once we had those metals, we could use them in everything else we make. And so our hardware is far more capable, far more reliable, far more efficient, again, because of that. And the nature, the result of that is that, during the X Prize, we learned that really anybody, any high school team that can do a first robotics competition can build literal rockets that could literally reach space. And so because all this technology is now available on the internet. And so, you just have to have a good plan and some competent high school level engineering and sit down and build yourself some rockets. And so that's actually a really exciting time that we're in when, so much of this technology is now available to so many. Exactly.
And especially I want to ask you, why is space so important? Like, especially like abroad of, on board of the International Space Station for the research. Why is it so effective to do research there than on Earth? Is it because of the vacancy of the gravity, because there's no gravity there, or is it just like a completely different environment? Why is it so effective?
You framed the question in a way that we may have a difference of perspective on the answer. So you'll see. So when you're in orbit, there are really two things that are special about this vantage point up at the International Space Station, other than the beautiful view. From a scientific standpoint, there's two things. One is there's a very hard vacuum out the window, and then the other is the apparent lack of gravity. And that is actually, the lack of gravity is the part you can't simulate well on the ground. I mean, you can pull a vacuum in a vacuum chamber anywhere on Earth, but it's the one unique property, the one importantly unique property about being in orbit is the fact that you don't feel gravity. The centrifugal force exactly balances against the actual gravity that you feel. And so if you want to do research that requires long duration and lack of gravity, you really need to be doing that in orbit around the Earth. And so, by the way, there is work like that to be done. I personally am of the opinion there's not much of that work to be done. I actually think that we spend billions of dollars a year keeping the space station in orbit, and maybe $5 billion a year as an international consortium keeping it in orbit, and billions more getting people back and forth to there. And I'm not sure that we as humanity are seeing that level of return on investment from a research standpoint. Mm-hmm. Now, by the way, I do think the International Space Station has been an incredibly important political success. it has kept us working closely, both scientifically and politically, with friends and allies, as well as potential enemies for decades. And I think that it should not be underestimated how valuable that has been and could be if we manage to hold the team together, so to speak, which doesn't appear we're going to be able to. But if we could, I think cooperation in space is great international diplomacy. But to the degree that there is valuable research to do there, it's time to turn that over to private hands. And that's one of the things that Axiom is now well set up to do. So to me, the good news for Axiom is not only are they allowed to now take people up and down, since they have their own module there and they have full ISS partner rights to take people there, but also as the countries, US, Russia, and others, kind of decide to throttle down their support of the space station in order to focus on going further, Axiom is sort of inheriting the parts and pieces and control of whatever they decide to maintain going forward as the a low Earth orbit space station. And so that, I think, is the right evolution. I think the challenge for Axiom is going to be how much of a space station can you afford to keep, and what kind of work goes on there. They're fairly bullish on both research side of what can be done in space, as well as the quote tourism aspects of what can be done in space. And at least for the tourism part, they have a lot of clients coming up right now. So they've got people to be flying this fall to go up to the space station and stay aboard their module on the space station.
Well, that's amazing. I think another advantage of the space station isn't it COVID free? I think it was the only place that didn't have COVID.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, exactly. It's the only corner of humanity. Well, there's actually a couple other places. Like there's a little island called Pitcairn that I was originally going to go on an expedition last summer to go to. It's a population 50. And as soon as COVID struck, they closed their borders of their 50-person island. And so they also have had no COVID, but that's because they've never had a visitor in year and a half.
That's really interesting. So I also know that you're a very huge fan of space, kind of like gadget collections, and you collect a lot. Yes, tell us what do you have behind you?
Oh, well, this is just pretty simple models. Going from in fact, the boxes here behind me I'm still working on these are 1/44th scale. There's a couple of Mercury vehicles still here in boxes, but then it moves up to that's a Gemini, followed by the Saturn 1B that my father went in. Then that's the Soyuz that I flew in. Space station with its solar panels, obviously, is big here behind me. And then we have the SpaceX rockets, including the new Starship. Out of scale to that, this is a Blue Origin, the new Shepard, but it's at a different scale. I have one coming in the 1/44th scale for here. But I also have submersibles. So there is the Trieste that dove down to the bottom of the Challenger Deep a little before I was born. I've been down on multiple dives in this orange-topped submersible that is called one of the two Mir submersibles. And you can't really see that the further off camera, I have another whole display case here of an active satellite called Sputnik 2. In fact, I can probably turn the camera over there a little bit, but yeah, this right here is Sputnik 2. More rockets and kind of parts and pieces of other things. That's the seat you can see right here behind me. That gray seat is the seat I actually rode in on my way to and from space in the Soyuz spacecraft that I was in. And downstairs, right even out in the hall, I have an original Sputnik. I have the original drawings. I got Tsiolkovsky, who invented spaceflight. I got his drawings and things like that. So yeah, I've got lots and lots.
And you also have a museum, right? The science.
Yeah, the whole house is sort of a little bit of a science museum here. And
I remember I sat on one of your. I think it was your seat. I think I
down in the entryway by the larger scale rocket parts, and so that's where I have like a hatch and the toilet and a window and a few other actual parts from the Soyuz, like the vehicle I flew in, and then there's also a seat like this seat, but in a cradle, so you can actually sit in it. So that's to let people kind of try it out, see how cramped you really were when you're sitting there.
It was really cramped. Yeah. So. We talked about space and we talked about the environment, and now obviously we are kind of like COVID helped us to adopt kind of like digital economy faster. Everybody had to deal with kind of like technology, even though they were not, tech savvy, like, households and so forth. And then obviously the digital economy and then digital currencies. So I want to ask you, what do you think of the digital currency and the digital economy? And now with all these like hypes around like Bitcoin, NFTs, and also the climate change kind of like mining aspect of the Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's well. Let's take the climate change mining problem last, because it is a problem. But let's just talk about the general concept of open ledgers and these digital currencies, or that can be built on, or a whole variety of tools that can be built on this same kind of open ledger system. First of all, it's just as a piece of technology, I think it is both very interesting and very important. And whether literally cryptocurrencies, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or Doge or anything else that might come up as a cryptocurrency, first of all, I find them to be interesting as an experiment, and I think ultimately will find a way to be important. The trick here is it's really hard to know which one, if any, are going to win in the long run, because they all run into various problems. For example, if you look at Bitcoin, which I would argue is still, at least is my favorite, and it still is doing the best. It is doing this. It's doing the best despite its periodic lack of adopting improvements that might make it less harmful, in an environmental sense, or less costly, or more speedy, or all these. It's because it was the first. People are reluctant to change it or leave it as much as maybe it ought to. But conversely, there are people that are really pursuing making a cryptocurrency-like product that is as transaction fee, speed, environmental impact as good a neighbor as possible. But it's very hard to get those adopted. In other words, it's yet another one of because anybody and their dog can create a cryptocurrency, and so it's hard to rise out of the noise of what's going on to be seen as relevant and important and get kind of a mass belief that it is. Which brings us up to the very interesting subject of Dogecoin. The one that Elon and others were talking about a lot. So he was tweeting about that one for so long that finally I said, okay, I've got to pay attention. I got to at least look. Let me check it out. And then you look at the entire history of it, and it's like flat, up until like literally 3 weeks ago from today, maybe 4 weeks ago. And then finally in 4 weeks, it's kind of popped up by 5x or something, which by cryptocurrency standpoint is not much movement. Cryptocurrencies usually have much higher swings up and down. And so, but I even have people loosely associated with our household who are not investor class folks come and go like, Doge, do I need to save some money and put it into Doge? And I'm going like, don't, because I guess if you don't even know what cryptocurrencies are, definitely don't go into the deep end of this pool. And so I think there are still a lot of ways to play that wrong, but I think they are here to stay. And so at the very least, I think, Bitcoin and Ethereum, I think are solid bets. They're not going away. It'll be interesting to see how they evolve. It's possible there'll be forks in them that, a new fork may take over, but I think it's more likely that the original ones are going to survive the test of time. And but whether there'll be very many winners other than those two, and whether those two can solve the issues of these environmental issues that I think are real issues, that we're spending an enormous amount of literal energy and money in wastefully mining these out, and that's sort of intrinsic in the way it was designed. And so it'll be interesting to see if the industry can really address these well.
Exactly. And do you think that there's an application for perhaps in the space, kind of like industry for cryptocurrency and digital assets?
I'm always cautious when people try to find new applications for not just cryptocurrencies, but any of these digital ledger kind of activities. And the reason why I go is like, as a game maker, I've had people come to me and go like, well, let's let's build all the objects in this game as things that are tracked on this open ledger, so that you, the player, really does own them. So if it's a virtual sword, I can actually take it out of the game and I can keep it on my own computer, and you can't take it from me, and it's mine. And then in theory, if I want to, I could take it into somebody else's game because it's something I actually own. To which I go, well, the only way that would work is if the other game also accepts this same token of this same sword and uses it in enough of a similar, if not identical way, that it's relevant, which is never going to happen in my mind. And so I've seen tons and tons of people try to build it. And by the way, I've even looked at it myself. I even looked at, pulling in, if what you're saying is use it like money, like, Tesla accepting Bitcoin or not now, for buying a Tesla. If you're saying, I want to make sure the virtual gold in this world is a currency that I can take in and out, and therefore spend my same real money, i.e. literally Ethereum or literally Bitcoin or whatever else it might be, in and move it to another game, I can earn money in your game and then spend it in another game. That at least I think is a basis that can work. But I think taking digital items out of one service into another, I've seen a lot of people try it, at least in the gaming area. I'm not sure that is an important piece of innovation.
Great. Last question. You're also into gaming industry, right? What are you doing right now? And before we say goodbye.
Yeah. So I am one of the earliest creators of games in the games industry. So that this Apple II computer back here is the machine I wrote my very first games on. A lot of games. I worked for my first 10 years of products came out of that game, on that machine. And in fact, that's where people who aren't really old computer nerds won't necessarily remember my Ultima series when I authored them under the name of Lord British. But the word avatar, which is obviously very common in games, comes from my first games on this computer. The entire category of massively multiplayer games comes from, not on this computer, we were to PCs by then, but it came from my similar product line, the Ultima series. And so for me in gaming, I've now had 3 companies that I've built and sold. And and so after each of those 3 companies, I sort of retired for 1 to 3 years to take a little break. And I am just sold recently my 3rd company. And so I'm on my kind of 1 to 3 year break. And we'll see if at the age I'll be turning 60 this summer. So we're going to see if I actually dive in as a creator again on games, or maybe I just stay as an advisor and investor on games. We'll see. But I do still have the machine I'm working, talking to you right now through is, brand new, top of the line, way overloaded gaming machine. I've got virtual reality hardware here. Wow. The kids have 2 more full up virtual reality setups downstairs. And so I'm still very plugged in, but at least at this moment, I don't have anything I'm creating at this time.
Perfect. Great. We'll tune in and see how that goes, and definitely we'll get an update from you soon. Thanks again for your time again.
Of course, Sam. My pleasure. Thanks. See you.